What if the girl you mocked for delivering packages, was the sister of the most powerful billionaire in the city? They laughed at her battered bike. They sneered at her worn-out sneakers. They treated her like invisible dust beneath their polished shoes. But what they didn't know was that the blood running through her veins could bring empires to their knees. And when the truth finally exploded into their perfect world, not even their money could save them. Stay with us, because the storm that's coming will change everything you thought you knew. The city pulsed around her like a living beast, hot pavement radiating waves of exhaustion, horns blaring in frustration, neon signs flickering promises she could never afford to chase. And Emma weaved through it all on her battered bike, a faded red courier bag slung across her narrow shoulders. Her knuckles scraped, her breath short but steady, because this was just another day, just another climb against a tide that never once gave her permission to rest. The streets smelled of gasoline, roasted peanuts, and the sharp metallic tang of ambition. But Emma kept her head down, dodging cars, ignoring the sneers from passers-by who saw only the scuffed shoes, the worn hoodie, the sweat tracing her temples, as if her entire worth could be measured in the state of her clothing. At the red lights, she balanced the bike with one foot on the curb, glancing down at the address scrawled on the wrinkled delivery slip, another high-rise, another marble lobby, where security guards would look at her as if she were gum on their polished floors. She adjusted the bag, feeling the corners of the heavy package dig into her spine, and pushed forward, weaving through the crowds of suited executives and glossy influencers who parted just enough to make her presence an inconvenience, never an equal. Her stomach growled, sharp and hollow, but she ignored it like she ignored everything else that hurt, focusing only on the next turn, the next street, the next breath, because quitting wasn't an option, not today, not ever. As she neared the towering glass structure of Whitmore Plaza, the sun caught on the mirrored windows, blinding her for a moment, and she had to squint against it, blinking away the tears that had nothing to do with the light. She chained her bike to a crooked metal post, the lock sticking for a painful second that made her heart race irrationally with the fear of losing even this battered piece of independence. Then she wiped her hands on her jeans and squared her shoulders before stepping into the gleaming maw of the lobby. Immediately, the temperature dropped, the air-conditioned chill sinking into her skin, the polished floors reflecting her like a warped funhouse mirror, a reminder of just how far outside this world she truly was. The receptionist, a blonde woman with manicured nails and a diamond watch, gave her a glance that lasted less than a second, but managed to say everything. Disdain, dismissal, disgust. Before turning back to her computer with a sigh sharp enough to cut. Emma walked forward anyway, each step an act of defiance wrapped in quiet humility, each heartbeat whispering a mantra she had lived by since she was old enough to be broken. Stay small, stay silent, stay invisible. But today, something in the air felt different, heavier, electric, as if the city itself was holding its breath, and though Emma didn't know it yet, today would not end the way any of them expected. Emma approached the front desk, the heavy package digging into her shoulder, her voice soft but steady as she gave the receptionist the name on the delivery slip. But the woman barely looked up, her perfectly shaped mouth twisting into a smirk as she pressed a button without a word, summoning security as if Emma were a threat rather than a girl just trying to do her job. And within moments, a tall man in a pressed uniform arrived. His expression already set to condescension as he ordered her to stand by the far wall, away from the velvet chairs and marble counters reserved for the important people. She obeyed without protest, shifting the weight of the package from one aching arm to the other, her throat dry, her cheeks burning as the lobby's occupants began to notice her, their eyes sliding over her like she was a stain they couldn't scrub away. Time dragged, seconds stretching into minutes, minutes into an hour, and no one came to collect the delivery. No one called her name. Instead, she stood there as the receptionist leaned over to whisper with a cluster of sharply dressed interns, their giggles slicing through the air like knives dipped in poison. Maybe she got lost on her way to the back alley. One of them said, loudly enough for Emma to hear, and the others snickered, not even bothering to hide their amusement, not even pretending she was worthy of basic decency. Emma gripped the strap of her bag tighter, her nails digging into the rough canvas, every muscle screaming to move, to leave, to run. But she stayed, because leaving would mean defeat, would mean they were right. And if she had learned anything in this brutal city, it was that survival wasn't about pride, it was about endurance. A man in an expensive suit passed by, his cologne sharp and cloying, tossing a crumpled bill onto the floor near her feet as if she were a beggar, and without thinking, Emma bent to pick it up, her face burning with shame she couldn't swallow fast enough. But before she could straighten, a camera flashed from across the lobby, the interns cackling as they captured her in the act, already composing captions in their heads about the pathetic delivery girl groveling for scraps. She straightened slowly, the bill crumpled in her fist, her heart hammering against her ribs, not with humiliation but with something older, deeper, a cold, slow-burning rage she hadn't let herself feel in years. Because rage was dangerous. Rage got you noticed, and being noticed had never been safe. She stuffed the bill into her pocket without looking at it, raised her chin a fraction higher, and fixed her gaze on the oversized clock mounted above the elevators, counting every second she was forced to stand there as if her existence itself were an inconvenience, every second etching a new scar onto the steel walls she had built around her heart. And somewhere deep inside, the place where broken dreams lived, something sharp and wild stirred, whispering that maybe she wasn't meant to stay invisible forever. Another hour bled away, the weight of the package turning Emma's arms numb, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing like a hive of invisible wasps drilling into her skull. And still, no one came to accept the delivery. No one acknowledged her presence except with occasional sneers, sidelong glances, the smug superiority of people who believed the universe had ordained their comfort and her suffering. And somewhere between the ticking clock and the ache crawling up her spine, Emma felt something inside her snap, not loudly, not violently, but with a terrifying silence, like a rope fraying one strand at a time until it simply gave way. She shifted the package to the floor, her fingers trembling slightly, and straightened her shoulders, forcing herself to breathe, forcing herself to remember that she was not the sum of their pity, not the reflection in their contemptuous eyes, but still, when one of the interns sauntered by, his voice dripping with mock concern as he asked if she needed directions to the soup kitchen, the burn behind her eyes was almost too much to hold back. She bit her lip hard enough to taste blood, grounding herself in the pain, in the reminder that even now, she would survive. She always survived. But survival had a cost, and Emma could feel the debt rising inside her like a tide, pressing against the fragile walls she had built to keep herself small, safe, unseen. The security guard finally lumbered back over, smirking, and told her the client refused the package, that she needed to leave immediately. And without ceremony or apology, he shoved the heavy box back into her arms, nearly knocking her off balance, laughter rippling from the front desk as she stumbled. For a heartbeat, she stood frozen, the lobby tilting around her, humiliation blistering beneath her skin like a fever. But then she caught her own reflection in the polished marble floor, saw the hunch of her shoulders, the hollow of her eyes, and something cold and clear flooded through her veins, washing away the shame, the fear, the smallness they wanted her to drown in. She straightened slowly, lifting the package with a steadiness that made the laughter falter, made the security guard's smirk twitch uncertainly, and without a word, she turned, walking across the lobby with deliberate, measured steps, each footfall a quiet act of rebellion, each breath a vow whispered in the language of the unbroken. She reached the glass doors, the weight of the city pressing against her as she pushed them open, stepping back into the roar and heat of the afternoon, her heart hammering not with defeat, but with something fierce and dangerous and alive, because today they had seen a delivery girl, a nobody, a piece of trash cluttering their perfect world. But soon, very soon, they would know exactly who she was. And they would wish to every god they prayed to that they had treated her with kindness while they still had the chance. The city swallowed her whole again, horns blaring, voices clashing, the heat pressing down like an iron hand. But Emma kept walking, her steps heavy, the weight of the package and the humiliation dragging behind her like chains she could not yet shake off. She slipped into an alley behind a row of shuttered cafes, the walls damp with years of forgotten rain, and slid down onto the cracked pavement, hugging her courier bag to her chest as if it could shield her from the cruel truths she had been forced to swallow all her life. Her chest heaved, but she refused to cry, refused to give them the satisfaction, until her phone buzzed against her thigh, a single name lighting up the cracked screen like a flare in the darkness. Ethan. Her hand trembled as she answered, pressing the phone to her ear, breathing in the silence that stretched taut across the line. Then came his voice, low, razor sharp, threaded with a rage so cold it made the summer air feel like ice. "Where are you?" he said. Not a question, not a plea, but a command born from a lifetime of protecting what little he had left to love. Emma choked out the address, her voice raw, and the moment the words left her lips, the silence grew heavier, darker, as if the very city itself braced for a storm. "Stay right there," Ethan said, every syllable like the crack of a whip. "Don't move." The call ended, abrupt and final, and Emma sat there in the fading light, her hands trembling not from fear, but from something older, something fiercer, a memory she had buried deep, that she was not alone, that somewhere beyond the towering glass and stone, someone still remembered her, someone who had sworn once, in a whisper against a hospital room door, that no matter how far she fell, he would find her. Minutes later, the low growl of engines tore through the street, black SUVs slicing through the evening traffic like predators on the hunt, and from the lead vehicle stepped Ethan Cross, the ghost her enemies whispered about in boardrooms, the shadow that toppled empires with a glance. He moved with the lethal grace of a man who had forgotten how to lose, his tailored suit a quiet armor, his expression a promise of ruin to anyone who dared touch what was his. He crossed the alley in 3 strides, his hands reaching for her, not with pity, but with fury and something infinitely more dangerous, love. Emma rose unsteadily, the world tilting around her, but Ethan caught her shoulders, grounding her, anchoring her in the storm he was about to unleash. "Come on, little sister," he said, his voice low and rough. "You've been invisible long enough." Behind him, the convoy waited, engines idling, the city holding its breath as the balance of power shifted in ways it could not yet see, and Emma, broken but not beaten, stepped forward, leaving behind the girl who had been humiliated, leaving behind the lies they had fed her, stepping into a world where they would finally learn the name they had dared to laugh at, and this time, it would be the last sound they heard before they fell. The black SUVs peeled away from the curb with a hum of precision, carving through the city streets with lethal intent, while Emma sat in the back seat beside Ethan, her hands gripping the seatbelt so tightly her knuckles turned white, the city blurring past the tinted windows, the neon lights smearing into streaks of gold and blood red, and still she couldn't speak, couldn't ask where they were going, because somewhere deep inside she already knew. This wasn't about safety. It wasn't about escape. It was about reckoning. Ethan's phone buzzed once, and he answered with a single word, "Move," before hanging up, his jaw tight, his eyes dark with the promise of war. And Emma watched him, this man who had once wiped mud from her knees when she fell, now a weapon sharpened by years of exile and power, a weapon he would gladly turn loose for her. The convoy turned sharply onto a private road lined with towering black oaks, their twisted branches clawing at the sky, and at the end of the drive rose Whitmore Plaza, the same gleaming tower that had been the stage for her humiliation only hours earlier, but now it stood silent and trembling under the weight of what was coming. The cars screeched to a halt in front of the grand entrance, scattering valet attendants like startled birds, and before the dust could settle, Ethan was already out, his coat flaring behind him like a shadow given life, Emma trailing a step behind, not because she was afraid, but because the magnitude of what he was about to do stole the breath from her lungs. The receptionist who had sneered at her earlier looked up, her smirk faltering, confusion flickering across her face as she rose to her feet, stammering a greeting, but Ethan didn't even glance at her. He simply strode forward, past the velvet ropes, past the polished marble, into the very heart of the place that had tried to strip his sister of her dignity. Executives spilled from the elevators, summoned by the unseen alarms of fear, their expensive shoes clicking nervously against the floor as they realized, too late, that power had entered the building, not the kind you could invite with flattery or bribe with gold, but the kind that moved mountains and buried kingdoms without a sound. Ethan's head of security, a man who looked more machine than human, stepped forward, handing over a tablet glowing with documents, contracts, recordings, all the evidence of the firm's corruption, their mistreatment of workers, their illegal dealings buried beneath layers of arrogance and paper. Ethan held it high enough for the room to see, his voice cold and merciless as he spoke, effective immediately. All contracts between Cross Industries and this firm are terminated, all assets frozen, all partnerships dissolved, and any attempt to contest will be met with full legal retribution. A collective gasp rippled through the room, the color draining from the faces of men and women who had built their lives on impunity, on the belief that they could step on whoever they wished without consequence. And now they watched helplessly as everything they owned, everything they schemed for, began to crumble into dust. Emma stood at Ethan's side, the package still clutched to her chest, no longer a symbol of humiliation, but a trophy of endurance, a scar she would wear with pride. And as she met the terrified eyes of those who had laughed at her, she realized something with a clarity so sharp it was almost holy. She had never needed their approval, their acceptance. She had always been enough, and now, at last, the world would see it too. The silence in the lobby cracked under the weight of Ethan's words, executives fumbling for excuses, lawyers stammering half-formed defenses, but Ethan stood unmoved, a pillar of precision and cold fury, and with a single nod to his security chief, the second strike began, hidden projectors flickering to life on the marble walls, flooding the space with images and video recordings that made the blood drain from every powerful face in the room. Footage of employees being mocked, underpaid staff being threatened, secret recordings of meetings where executives joked about exploiting workers too poor to fight back. Every sickening moment laid bare not just for those inside Whitmore Plaza, but now streamed live to the public. Ethan's legal team having triggered a media blast that no amount of money or PR spin could bury. Emma stood frozen, the glow of the screens painting her face in cold light, as the same receptionist who had sneered at her earlier crumbled into tears, as partners in $1,000 suits begged for second chances, their masks stripped away in front of their peers, their power bleeding out onto the marble floors. But Ethan was not finished. With the flourish of a final signature on a thick stack of papers, he announced that Cross Industries would be donating millions of dollars to grassroots organizations supporting worker protections, using the same funds they had just torn away from Whitmore's shattered partnerships. A punishment that didn't just hurt, it humiliated. It made sure the whole city would remember this collapse, would remember Emma, the delivery girl they had spat on, now standing in silent judgment. Yet even as they crumbled, another twist unfolded, one that no one had seen coming, not even Emma herself. Ethan turned to her, his voice carrying across the stunned silence, and in front of the broken remains of these so-called elites, he announced that the Cross family would be launching a new company, a worker-owned delivery network where those like Emma would have control, ownership, dignity, an empire not built on broken backs but on solidarity and strength, and at its head, he offered, would be Emma herself. The room reeled, and Emma felt the weight of the offer settle on her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a crown. She could destroy them further if she wanted, could bury every single person who had ever mocked her. But as she looked at their pale faces, their trembling hands, she realized she didn't need to. Their own greed had destroyed them better than she ever could. Emma stepped forward, her voice clear and her back straight, and said the words that would echo long after the marble dust settled. "I'm not here to become what you fear. I'm here to build what you could never imagine." The roar of approval from the gathered workers, the stunned reverence from the few who had dared to hope, swept through the lobby like a tidal wave, drowning out the old world, baptizing the new. Emma didn't just reclaim her dignity that day, She rewrote the rules entirely. The sun dipped lower behind the glass towers, casting long shadows across the ruined lobby of Whitmore Plaza. But Emma stood tall among the wreckage, not a queen crowned by vengeance, but a builder holding blueprints of a future no one else dared to dream. The crowd around her still buzzing, reporters scrambling to capture every angle, every tear-streaked executive, every shattered illusion. Yet in the center of it all, she remained calm, untouched by the chaos she had every right to claim. Ethan stood at her side, silent, steady, the unyielding shield he had always promised to be. And when he quietly offered to buy out the entire firm, raze it to the ground, salt the earth so nothing could ever grow in the place where they had humiliated her, Emma smiled, soft and sad, and shook her head. "No," she said, her voice carrying further than any act of destruction could have. "Let them stay. Let them remember every day who brought them to their knees, not with fists, but with truth." Ethan's eyes softened, a flicker of pride breaking through the iron mask he wore for the world, because he understood what the others never would. Real strength was not found in crushing your enemies. It was found in choosing not to become them. The offer to lead the new worker-owned delivery company still hung between them, heavy and golden. But Emma paused, not out of fear, not out of doubt, but because she realized something deeper, something that pulled at the roots of her soul. She didn't just want to lead a company. She wanted to change an entire system. She wanted to reach every invisible hand still clutching at hope in back alleys and underpasses, every voice still trembling under the weight of survival. So she made a different choice, a harder one. She would launch the company, yes, but she would not sit behind a glass desk in a penthouse office. She would stay in the streets. She would ride with her people, deliver packages side by side, share the dust and sweat and victories. She would build from the ground up, not just for them, but with them, because dignity could not be gifted. It had to be earned together. She turned to Ethan, her chin lifting with the quiet defiance that had once been mistaken for meekness, and nodded. "We start tomorrow," she said, "but we start from the street where they forgot we existed." And somewhere, deep in the marrow of the city, a new heartbeat began to pulse, steady and unstoppable, carrying her name not as a whisper of pity, but as a war cry of hope. Emma Cross, the girl they tried to bury, the woman they could never contain. The next morning, while the city still yawned and stretched beneath a sky tinged with pale gold, Emma pulled on her worn sneakers, tied the laces with steady fingers, and slung a fresh courier bag over her shoulder, a new uniform stitched not with luxury, but with pride, the phoenix emblem gleaming over her heart, a symbol of everything that had risen from the ashes of humiliation and cruelty. She didn't arrive at the new headquarters in a limousine, didn't walk past security with whispered reverence. She rolled up on an old refurbished delivery bike, the same battered spirit, but now riding on wheels of purpose. And as she coasted to a stop outside the modest brick building that bore no grand signs, no glitzy slogans, just the simple word, Phoenix, dozens of workers waiting outside erupted into cheers. They were delivery drivers, warehouse staff, former gig workers discarded by the corporations that had treated them like disposable parts. And now, under Emma's leadership, they had contracts with healthcare, fair wages, ownership shares, and most importantly, respect. Emma dismounted, laughing, hugging people she had never met but already knew, because she had walked their roads, carried their burdens, survived their storms. Cameras flashed from the edges of the crowd, news anchors scrambling to craft the next headline about the billionaire's sister who rejected gold to build a movement. But Emma ignored them all, her focus locked on the faces that mattered, the faces that had once looked like hers in the mirror when hope seemed a distant stranger. They opened the building together, not with ribbon-cutting ceremonies or champagne toasts, but with a simple gathering in the sunlit lobby, where Emma stood on a wooden crate and spoke without notes, without polish, her voice rough from late nights planning and early mornings organizing, but stronger than any corporate press release. "We're not here to ask for permission," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "We're here because we deserve better. And we're going to build it, together." Cheers erupted, fists pumped into the air, and for the first time in too long, the city felt a shift, a crack in the granite towers of greed where sunlight could finally break through. Across the country, other workers watched the news clips, whispered her name, and started asking harder questions in their own workplaces. Across boardrooms, the powerful shifted uncomfortably in their seats, realizing too late that the world they had controlled with fear was slipping from their grasp, carried away by hands they had once refused to see. Emma didn't claim a CEO title, didn't sit on thrones of leather and glass. She delivered packages alongside her teams. She sat cross-legged on warehouse floors eating sandwiches. She laughed and fought and bled with them. And in doing so, she built something stronger than any corporate empire ever could trust. The girl they had tried to break had become the architect of a revolution they couldn't stop. She didn't burn bridges. She built highways. Highways made of every scar, every insult, every moment they told her she wasn't enough. And now, as the sun climbed higher over the city, Emma Cross smiled, knowing that no matter how hard the road would get, she had already won the only battle that ever truly mattered. She had reclaimed herself. Years later, long after the marble towers of the old corporations had crumbled, after the headlines had faded and the flash of cameras had moved on to the next spectacle, the world still spoke her name, not in boardrooms or at glittering galas, but in the quiet corners of warehouses, in the break rooms of delivery hubs, in the tired smiles of workers who no longer bowed their heads in shame. Emma Cross became more than a founder, more than a leader. She became a symbol stitched into the fabric of a new world, a world where dignity was not a luxury, but a right. Schools taught her story not as a fairy tale, but as a blueprint, a living testament to what could rise from humiliation if met with courage. Her workers, her family, carried her philosophy like a torch into new cities, new industries, building systems that honored effort over pedigree, character over appearance. The delivery empire she had refused to rule from a throne spread across continents, not because of aggressive expansion or ruthless mergers, but because of loyalty, trust, and a shared dream too powerful to be co-opted by greed. In quiet interviews, industry leaders confessed they had underestimated her, mistaking humility for weakness, mistaking kindness for naivety, and in doing so, they had sealed their own irrelevance. Emma never sought revenge on those who mocked her in Whitmore Plaza. Their downfall came not from her hand, but from the rot within their own foundations. And perhaps that was the greatest justice of all. On the anniversary of Phoenix's founding, a massive gathering filled a stadium once used for corporate showcases, now a place where workers cheered each other's victories, shared their innovations, and honored their resilience. Emma stood at the center of the stage, wearing the same simple sneakers, the same quiet fire in her eyes, and spoke without a script, just the truth that had carried her through every dark alley and glass-ceilinged lobby. "They taught us to be invisible," she said, her voice strong enough to hush the roaring crowd. "They taught us to be ashamed, but we remembered who we are. We built something they couldn't even imagine, and we're not finished yet." As the crowd erupted into thunderous applause, the camera panned upward, past the cheering faces, past the banners and bright lights, up into the sky where a single drone traced a message in the clouds: dignity, courage, Phoenix. Long after the echoes faded, experts and historians would debate what Emma Cross truly represented. Was it a rebellion, a renaissance, a revolution? But the people who mattered already knew. Emma was the living proof that you could be laughed at, stepped on, discarded, and still rise higher than those who tried to bury you. You could turn every sneer into fuel, every closed door into a hammer, every insult into the foundation of something that would outlive them all. And somewhere in a dusty alley where a broken girl once sat alone, the air still shimmered with the ghost of a promise, a reminder whispered to every soul who dared to believe they were worth more. They tried to bury her. They forgot she was a seed, and from that seed grew a fire that could never, ever be extinguished. They thought she was nobody. They thought her silence meant surrender. But Emma Cross taught the world that dignity wears no uniform, that strength needs no title, and that family is a force more powerful than any fortune. She didn't seek revenge. She built a revolution. And today, somewhere, a delivery girl stands a little taller. A forgotten worker dares to dream a little bigger, because they know now. The smallest voice can one day shake the tallest towers. They tried to bury her, but she was never the soil. She was the seed, and the fire that would never, ever die.